Hi, it's Chantal here again. Welcome back to Shanti Bloom. Last week, I was sharing with you the myths and the misconceptions about setting boundaries. And in today's video, I'll be sharing with you 7 important tips for setting healthy personal boundaries in your life. And without delay, let's get right into it. Tip number 1, tell yourself that it is okay to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is about creating these guidelines, setting limits in your life and your relationships in a way that is healthy. You know, there are limits to everything. There is a limit to what you can do and how far you can go. Setting boundaries also help put a limit to what you tolerate from others and how far they can get into your space. You cannot really be everything to everybody at every time. And this does not mean that you're trying to keep people out of your life. Actually, you tend to enjoy your relationships because they are established on a foundation of mutual love and respect. So please, it's okay to set boundaries. You have to set boundaries for your safety from manipulators and people who want to take advantage of you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. You need to set those boundaries for safety. But not everybody is out to get you, but you still need to set, healthy boundaries for your privacy. Vulnerability does not mean that you do not deserve some privacy. You need to set boundaries. Most importantly, self-care. That is the top. That's the main reason. Self-care. You cannot pour out of an empty cup. Number 2, identify what areas of your life need boundaries. And I must say that this is not an easy one. There are areas in my life that even took me years to finally put a finger on what the problem was, to finally see that, hey, this was a boundary problem and this is where I have to put that boundary and this is how I have to set that boundary. So it is not something that will come by, overnight. But there are some questions that if you ask yourself, it will be a lot easier to identify those areas in your life that really need boundaries. You can ask yourself, what areas of my life right now are in chaos? What are the areas in my life that bring me fear, anxiety, anger, bitterness, resentment? Because where there are very loose boundaries or no boundaries at all, those are the type of things that breed. So if you see things like that in your life or in a certain area in your life, then most likely you need a boundary in that area. Is there chaos in my work life, in my relationships, with my finances, in my spiritual life? What are those external factors, or what are those people who are negatively influencing, these areas of my life? It is very important to ask this question, but even more important is to ask why. The why will always help you to determine if it is a boundary problem or it's not a boundary problem. Because let's take, for example, maybe I realize that there's a lot of chaos going on in my work life. I always have work piled on my table. I'm always behind. I can ask myself, why? Why do I always have work piled up? Is it because I show up late to work, or I'm always calling off 3-4 times in a week? Of course, work is going to pile up. But if I ask the why, and it's because people take advantage of me, people dump their work on me, people take me for granted and give me work that is outside my responsibility, then that is a red flag right there. There is some boundary issues there. And even the other 2 that I've mentioned, if you want to ask even further, why am I showing up late to work? Why am I taking off so often? If you go deeper, you may also find some boundary issues even centered around that too. So please take your time. Do not be in a rush. Be observant, be attentive, and you'll be able to identify those areas in your life that need boundaries. And this will bring us to tip number 3, which is to forgive past hurts. I say this because when you finally identify those areas that need boundaries, you may find out some things. You may discover that you have been taken advantage of. You may discover that you have been manipulated. And those things can build anger, resentment, bitterness, and you do not want to set boundaries from that kind of a place. You must have heard so many people say that you should set boundaries based on what you feel is right for you and not others. This is very true, but if we set boundaries centered around our feelings alone, it can equally become very tricky, because at times those feelings may not be coming from a good place. Somebody can say, I'm just going to say no to this person because I hate them, and that is how I feel, and those are my boundaries. We have to be very careful with some of the motivational talk we hear today, encouraging us about self-development, self-awareness. There is a difference between self-awareness, self-development, and being so self-centered, prideful, arrogant, and controlling. Boundaries set from the place of pride and arrogance, personal biases always end up being very controlling and oppressive. And on the other hand, boundaries that you set from that place of anger, bitterness, resentment, always end up being this big wall that traps even you who set the boundaries. And I totally understand past hurts don't go away overnight, right? Forgiveness is instant, but that healing may really take time. But the first step is accepting that you are angry, accepting that you're bitter, accepting that you are resentful, because how can you deal with an emotion you do not even accept that it exists? When you accept it and then you are willing to go through that process of healing, the way you will set that boundary will be different. You would set that boundary saying, hey, you know what, I need to set this boundary because I'm in a season where I'm still trying to heal. So there need to be a boundary, and I'm setting this boundary because this thing cannot repeat itself. That boundary is coming from a healthy place. And while you take your time to heal, there's a boundary to protect you from any further hurt. So yes, let's set boundaries based on what we feel comfortable with, but we should just ensure that those feelings are pouring out of a heart that is God-led. Tip number 4, create the boundaries, right? It's one thing to identify your boundaries, and it's another thing to actually set those boundaries. Now that you've identified the things that you do not like, the things that are not going well in your life, and how you desire things to be, it's time for you to now create guidelines, set those limits that will help you to achieve your expected outcomes. But while you're creating these boundaries, keep 3 things in mind. 1, it's more about your heart and less about rules and all the dynamics that you may bring in. People actually respond to your heart more. I can still remember times that people have given me some hard no's, and I can look through that no and see a heart that is full of love and respect for me. So it is more about the heart and less about rules. The 3rd thing to note is that creating a boundary could also mean delegating. If you read Exodus chapter 18, you will see Moses' father-in-law telling him that, Moses, this thing you're doing will wear you out and will wear these other people out. Make sure that you delegate. And even the disciples, at some point, they had to delegate some people to be serving tables while they are, out there preaching the gospel, because they were like, you know what, we cannot do both, because then we don't function, we don't work from the place of rest, and we are not able to be effective in what we are doing. So delegating is also a form of setting boundaries. Tip number 5, communicate your boundaries clearly and firmly. You do not expect people to get into your mind to understand what your boundaries are, right? Because most boundaries are either emotional, mental, or spiritual. Very few boundaries are physical. So we need to clearly communicate these boundaries so that people understand what their limits are. Even though there are people who will clearly see your boundary and they will still cross over it, right? And they may not only cross over it, they will try to manipulate or bully you into actually taking off that boundary. But bottom line, we have to communicate these boundaries. How you communicate your boundaries will determine how well they are understood and respected. When you communicate your boundaries, make sure it is not a threat. Don't say that if you guys keep treating me this way in this office, I'm going to quit. First of all, you are threatening. Secondly, you are giving a consequence that you may not be able to push through. Are you sure that if they keep taking you for granted in that office, you're really going to quit? And are you sure that if you quit, it will even make any difference? Or maybe I tell my kids, if you guys don't come over here and help me with the dishes or help with dinner, then forget about dinner. You're not eating tonight. First of all, it's a threat, and secondly, I am not going to follow through with that consequence because those kids are having dinner this night. So, a better way or a healthy or clear way of setting a boundary is that, hey, when you people help out with the dishes or help out with dinner, then dinner is ready on time. We get to spend more time at the table. Maybe we go to bed much earlier. We all wake up in the morning energized. So it is clearly stated, this is the expectation, and this is the reason, and this is the outcome. So you're clearly stating a boundary. You're not threatening, you're not putting unrealistic consequences. Also, make sure you do not communicate it by over justifying or over explaining, right? I think this point is for me because if you have my kind of personality, I tend to over explain things. I want to break things down. I want to give you the backstory. I want to give you the foundational story. This is not really needed when you are trying to communicate boundary. If you're teaching somebody something, that is needed. But when you're communicating communicating a boundary, you just have to be clear, you have to be firm, and you have to keep the explanation plain and simple so that they can be seen and they can be respected. There are other things in our lives that, yes, we owe nobody no explanation, but those have got nothing to do with boundaries. And please do not be offended or angry if your boundaries are not readily accepted, because it will take others, some time to adjust to your new boundaries. But that does not mean that you should stop setting your boundaries. Set them, be firm about them, but understand that it will take time for people to clearly understand it and for them to accept it and for them to adjust to it. And finally, another great way to communicate your boundaries and have them respected is if you respect the boundaries yourself. When you respect your own boundaries, you teach others to respect them as well. Have you ever walked into a home that is so well organized, everything is so clean and put in place? From the moment you walk in, you are just taking off your shoes. Nobody has told you that you should do that, but everything is just so orderly that you feel like, no, I have to take off my shoes before I walk into this house. And if you get in there and you drop something on the floor, you are quickly asking for a cloth, you're quickly picking up anything that you have dropped on the floor, because the environment speaks for itself. And that's the same thing when you respect your own boundaries. The people that are surrounding you, they watch and see how you treat those boundaries. They will just fall in line. How do you treat your time, your energy, your finances, your personal space? What are the things you say to yourself? How do you see you? How you treat you is how others are going to treat you. I'll also like to add here that if you truly want others to respect these boundaries that you have set for yourself, then learn to respect the boundaries of others. There are just some people who are intentionally insensitive to the emotions of others. Please do not step into an emotional zone that you have not been invited into. People have a lot of emotional sensitive areas in their lives. Right now as we speak, there may be this elderly lady or man who desire to be married and it hasn't happened yet. That can be an emotional sensitive area for them. Maybe a couple who is looking for a baby and it hasn't come yet. Maybe somebody who is going through a divorce, someone who has just experienced a huge failure in business or in life in general. Maybe that parent that is suffering and going through, who is going through a difficult time with a difficult or a troubled child. Why do we always blind our eyes to the good things that are happening in people's lives, and we only see those sensitive areas and we take our fingers and go and poke over there in order to hurt them? And please, I'm not saying that you should not reach out to your friends, your loved ones, that colleagues, somebody in church, somebody in your neighborhood, to ask about something they're struggling with in their lives, out of care and out of concern. That is very okay. Remember I said your heart speaks loudest. If it is really from a good place, I believe that somewhere it would also resonate with them that this person is asking this thing out of love and concern. Like parents, mentors, they may see that you're going through something, they may see that you're drowning in something, and even though you are not welcoming anybody into that zone, they may be at the door and keep knocking and saying, hey, you know what, I think you need help, let me know whenever you need help. So please, until somebody opens up that emotional door for you, stay 6 feet apart. Respect people's boundaries and they will respect yours. Tip number 6, do not make your boundaries rigid. Remember that you are growing, and as you are growing, your boundaries will be changing. You are moving from glory to glory. You're moving from season to season. You're moving from stage to stage, and so boundaries will be changing. That is why I was advising earlier that we should not set boundaries from a place of pride and arrogance and biases, or from that place of anger, bitterness, resentment, because those type of boundaries are always rigid and not very flexible. And finally, tip number 7, seek help. Setting boundaries and maintaining them can be very challenging, especially if you are new to the aspect or the concept of setting healthy boundaries. If you have the people-pleasing tendencies, if your self-worth comes from external praises or external validation, if you still have some myths and misconceptions, which I spoke about in my last video, if you are still having some of those misconceptions about setting healthy personal boundaries, then this process can become a little bit more challenging for you. So what you can do is to seek help. Maybe identify somebody, a friend or a colleague or whoever has already been able to set boundaries and maintain them. Sometimes, iron sharpens iron. They could be of help. Seek help from a parent, a counselor, a mentor, and above all, talk to God. Seek His help. Right now, do you feel like your life is in a state of chaos? Are you having feelings of fear, anxiety, anger, bitterness, resentment, regret? If all these things are overwhelming you, come before God and just be in that state of abandon. Like, you know what? Here am I, Lord. Help me. Help me. He is the God that can calm the storms. The winds and the waves, they still obey Him. So He will guide you. He will bring people in your path. He will bring resources in your path that you can use. Even this video you're watching right now can be one of the resources that God brings in your path. You'll be able to experience a life of contentment, of a life of fulfillment. Above all, you'll be able to live a life with purpose, and you'll be able to influence other people. So this is not time to live in regret that you did not set boundaries, or maybe your boundaries were loose, or maybe you were even your own worst enemy and you've made mistakes in life. This is no time for regret, because He is a God of second chances. He can still make all things beautiful. Your life can still bloom and flourish the way that you were designed to. I hope you found this helpful, and please consider subscribing to Shanti Bloom for more videos like this that will help you bloom and flourish in your everyday life. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.